US President Donald Trump has doubled down on his hardline trade stand, declaring that no country, especially China, would be spared from his sweeping tariff.
The American economy is navigating a period of significant upheaval, prompting some analysts to label it a pivotal moment. Major retail chains are increasingly retracting substantial orders from China, while simultaneously, a surge of containers awaiting dispatch at Chinese ports threatens to disrupt global trade flows. Amid escalating trade tensions between the United States and China, questions arise. Are new tariffs and logistical expenses steering supply chains toward an irreversible trajectory? Recent reports from American media indicate a trend where prominent Chinese importers are canceling orders in rapid succession. Leading e-commerce platforms and significant U.S. retail companies are reportedly facing a sharp decline in Chinese product availability. Economists express concern that this surge could create substantial gaps in the supply chain, with numerous containers at Chinese ports remaining unloaded or even being withdrawn. The magnitude of these canceled orders is impacting the shipping industry, which is already grappling with recessionary pressures. This situation prompts critical inquiries. Why is there a sudden spike in U.S. order cancellations? Are high tariffs the primary culprit? Or are other factors at play? Leaked information from official sources suggests that newly announced additional tariffs, anticipated to persist, are inflating import costs to unprecedented levels. Specifically, the U.S. administration's declarations of imposing significantly higher tariffs on products related to defense and strategic technology are causing apprehension among companies collaborating with Chinese manufacturers. These tariffs potentially encompass a broad spectrum of products, ranging from electronic components to pharmaceutical raw materials and consumer electronics. Concurrently, as inflationary pressures mount in the U.S. domestic market, the increased cost of imported goods naturally compresses retailers' profit margins. In essence, large corporations may seek to avoid transferring these additional costs to consumers or selling at a loss. From the perspective of Chinese manufacturers, social media posts reveal a reluctance to offer discounts, even as U.S. buyers attempt to negotiate lower prices for pre-ordered products or seek additional concessions. Chinese manufacturers appear disinterested in these demands. Some sources report that Chinese suppliers are steadfast, asserting that a significant portion of exports has already diminished, necessitating cost-saving measures. Manufacturers have long voiced concerns about rising raw material prices and labor costs. American media warned that this crisis could have devastating consequences for both parties. The accumulation of containers at ports could result in a major bottleneck at the core of global logistics. Already, some of the largest U.S. retail chains are reportedly reducing their reliance on Chinese sourcing and exploring alternatives. Official statements suggest that companies are attempting to mitigate tariffs by shifting operations to Southeast Asian countries or other regions. In other words, American retailers might be operating under the rationale that Chinese tariffs have escalated costs excessively, prompting a search for more affordable options. So, where do Chinese producers stand in this unfolding drama? According to several circulating posts online, many factories across China have stopped offering discounts altogether. While American importers push to renegotiate pricing on existing contracts or squeeze in last-minute concessions, their Chinese counterparts are standing firm. In fact, some Chinese suppliers have been vocal about their reasoning. With exports already on the decline, they say they can't afford to take further losses. Instead, they're prioritizing cost control and preserving their slim profit margins. Manufacturing firms have long expressed concern over spiking raw material costs and rising wages. This new disruption only compounds those pressures. American media outlets are sounding the alarm, warning that the snowballing container congestion at China's export hubs could soon ignite a global logistics chokehold. Should the buildup persist, the ramifications would extend well beyond retail. Big box chains in the U.S. are already slashing their procurement from Chinese sources. Several reports indicate that some corporations are taking steps to shift production to Southeast Asian nations or other emerging markets, essentially attempting to dodge the costly blowback of Chinese tariffs by sourcing elsewhere. This strategy suggests a broader recalibration. U.S. retailers are deciding that the price of doing business with China has grown too steep, and they're beginning to place their bets on more affordable production regions. At a macro level, this evolving approach to supply chains is triggering debate. Is this a temporary detour or a sign of something permanent? While some industry insiders see the current turbulence as cyclical, others argue the policy shift may stick, especially if Washington's tariff regimen becomes embedded long-term. Much of this pivot echoes a familiar economic philosophy, the desire to enhance domestic manufacturing competitiveness. Protectionist instincts are alive and well, following a path not far removed from prior administrations. But the real challenge? Getting both retail giants and e-commerce platforms to embrace more expensive homegrown goods. That's no easy sell. Despite calls for strategic autonomy, China remains the undisputed leader in global manufacturing. Its vast capacity spans countless categories, delivering volume and cost advantages that few nations can replicate. Yet, when aggressive tariffs begin to strip away those cost benefits, the equilibrium shifts. In response, some corporations are scouring new regions for low-cost labor. Meanwhile, logistics operators, particularly shipping conglomerates, are wrestling with serious headwinds. A surge in canceled orders has left freight carriers scrambling. Unused containers are stacking up in ports, dragging freight rates downward. Terminal operators are also reportedly taking losses. And for the average consumer, this turbulence is set to hit where it hurts, the wallet. The domino effect is now reaching online retail giants like Amazon. In the past, Chinese sellers made up a considerable share of the platform's vendor base. Their wide range of low-cost goods helped drive massive volumes, benefiting both customers and Amazon's commission-driven business model. But with the introduction of steep new tariffs, this landscape is shifting rapidly. Many sellers based in China are either increasing their prices or pulling out of the U.S. market altogether. Social media has been flooded with screenshots of messages from small to mid-sized vendors, apologizing to customers for price hikes. Due to increased taxes, we are adjusting our pricing. Others have gone further, announcing their complete exit from the American marketplace. This exodus threatens to shrink the diversity of products on Amazon, eroding its price competitiveness. With fewer players in the game, prices tend to rise, ultimately meaning higher costs for consumers and fewer bargains. At the same time, Chinese exporters are searching for strategies to offset their losses. According to rumors in trade circles, some suppliers are resorting to semi-legal and even outright illegal tactics in an attempt to sidestep the new taxes. These include undervaluing goods on export documents to reduce customs fees. Of course, getting caught could result in serious consequences, fines, blacklisting, and brand damage. But for some struggling businesses, such workarounds are seen as necessary risks. In response, U.S. customs officials are reportedly tightening their inspection procedures and enhancing enforcement against fraudulent shipping declarations. This new level of scrutiny only adds to the tension between both sides and could ignite further trade hostilities. So what's the official line from Washington? In short public statements, the White House has emphasized the need to reinforce domestic production capabilities. For decades, U.S. companies relied heavily on China's low-cost manufacturing. Now, the narrative has shifted toward reshaping strategic supply chains, an effort framed as both necessary and long-term. According to the press secretary, this won't be a rapid turnaround. The goal is to gradually reduce dependence on foreign suppliers and encourage investments in homegrown manufacturing sectors. The reality, however, is far more complicated. Such a shift requires monumental investment, infrastructure development, and time. And critically, it demands an economic environment where American-made goods can remain price competitive, despite significantly higher labor costs. This change could send shockwaves through multiple sectors. From pharmaceuticals and textiles to electronics and automotive components, much of the current U.S. supply system is deeply entangled with Chinese production. Industry insiders warn that any disruption could bring ripple effects across the entire global economy. A broader trade war, paired with supply chain restructuring, would not only challenge manufacturers, but also reshape consumer markets, global pricing, and industrial policy. And while the White House points to a strategic reorientation, the Chinese government is issuing a response of its own. Beijing is also pledging to strengthen domestic markets and diversify its export destinations, seeking to offset potential losses from reduced access to American consumers. In effect, both sides are digging in for a prolonged standoff. And unlike in earlier phases of U.S.-China trade tensions, this chapter is less about short-term tactics and more about the long-term realignment of global power through supply. With talk of new tariffs expanding to include computer chips and pharmaceutical raw materials, the prospect of an even broader trade war is beginning to take shape. For American companies, the situation is becoming a real puzzle. On one side, skyrocketing logistics costs and import taxes. On the other, inflationary pressure and wavering consumer confidence in the post-pandemic economy. If businesses pass those additional costs on to consumers, demand will inevitably fall, taking a toll on sales and shrinking already thin profit margins. But if they absorb the costs themselves, the financial strain could be equally damaging. It's a lose-lose dilemma. This exact scenario may explain the sudden wave of large-scale cancellations seen recently. Some insiders suggest this is part of a calculated strategy. Halt orders now, reassess later, once the new tariffs are fully in place and the impact becomes clearer. China is taking notice. Images circulating on Chinese social media show rows of containers collecting dust at key ports. While a portion of those are reportedly empty, others represent canceled shipments, orders that were prepped and packed but never made it out of the yard. This drop in activity could significantly dent China's export earnings, and given the country's export-driven growth model, such a slowdown poses real risk for Beijing's broader economic stability. But the effects won't stop there. Disruption between these two global trade giants sends ripples worldwide, across Europe, throughout Asia, and even into developing markets in Africa. Because in the modern world, supply chains aren't isolated, they're interconnected. One break can trigger a chain reaction. It's not just e-commerce or retail feeling the heat. This trade tension is now rippling through other massive sectors. Automotive manufacturers, real estate developers, and tech conglomerates are all being dragged into the crossfire. Semiconductor companies in particular are reportedly holding off on major supply agreements as they await clarity on whether U.S. authorities will impose additional tariffs on chips and high-tech components. If that happens, the ripple effect on pricing could be severe. Smartphones, laptops, and even household appliances could become significantly more expensive, triggering a slowdown in consumer spending across tech markets. Some analysts are even speculating that we could see a wave of consumer hesitation, shoppers opting to hold on to old devices rather than upgrading to newer, pricier models. That trend would send a jolt through the tech sector, which thrives on frequent turnover and product cycles. A slowdown could easily spiral into a tech recession, shrinking research and development budgets and disrupting future innovation. Of course, both China and the U.S. have different forms of leverage. China can influence global pricing and supply flows thanks to its sheer manufacturing power. The U.S., meanwhile, controls one of the world's largest consumer markets, and where the American consumer goes, global companies tend to follow. Each side is watching the other closely, gauging whether they'll blink or bargain. As this standoff drags on, analysts are warning that large-scale cancellations and congestion may become the new norm. If tariffs continue to expand across industries, we're likely to see similar chaos in other sectors: logistics, industrial parts, electronics, pharmaceuticals. The tension isn't easing. If anything, it's hardening. With tensions mounting, many are wondering, can American corporations simply walk away from China? The short answer, no, not easily. According to industry reports, companies like Amazon and Walmart are already investing in alternative supply routes across Asia. But shifting manufacturing on this scale involves more than just changing addresses. Infrastructure, production capacity, political stability, these all play critical roles. While countries like Vietnam and India are emerging as viable alternatives, building up the necessary logistics and factory ecosystems takes time. You can't replicate China's vast manufacturing machine in a matter of months. On top of that, global giants still view China's internal market as a major prize. Pulling out completely would mean forfeiting access to one of the world's fastest-growing consumer bases, something few are willing to do. So instead of a clean break, what we're seeing is a strategic repositioning. Companies are hedging their bets, diversifying supply lines without cutting ties altogether. The White House, in a statement issued this April, acknowledged that trade disputes are unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. However, they reiterated a long-term commitment to rebuilding American manufacturing and insulating the economy from global shocks. Meanwhile, Chinese state media struck a similar tone, emphasizing efforts to fortify domestic demand and explore new export markets. Both nations seem willing to weather the turbulence, hoping that time, leverage, or exhaustion will tip the balance. What we're witnessing isn't just a trade standoff. It's a high-stakes chess match being played across continents with factories, ports, and economies as pieces on the board. As retail giants in the United States cancel orders and brace for heightened tariffs, the big question looms: are we witnessing a short-term flare-up or the start of a sustained trade war? China's no-discount posture, despite mountains of idle containers, signals a hardened stance. Meanwhile, American firms are recalibrating, weighing the cost of alternatives, but not abandoning China altogether. Could the two sides find common ground and strike a new trade agreement? Possibly. But with strategic priorities shifting and mutual trust eroding, that path is looking narrower by the day. If cooler heads prevail, we may see negotiations restart in a bid to prevent deeper economic fallout. But if rhetoric intensifies and tariffs keep expanding, the global economy could be staring down a new era of fragmentation, where self-sufficiency trumps globalization. For now, the signs are troubling canceled shipments, empty store shelves in some sectors, rising costs, and declining margins. None of this bodes well for recovery, especially for countries still clawing their way back from pandemic-era setbacks. Financial institutions and policy circles are watching closely. The risks are real, and the stakes are enormous. As for Amazon, Walmart, and the rest, will they manage to restructure their operations without breaking the bank? Will Chinese suppliers double down or bend under pressure? This is a game with no guaranteed winners, just layers of complexity, shifting alliances, and rising costs. So as this global chess match plays out, one thing is certain: the age of easy trade is over.